Coming up, is it a lack of talent or a culture of nepotism? Plus, what was a tourist thinking by bringing sand to the beach?
You're listening to Brent's 2 Cents, the semi-serious thoughts of a guy in Belize. And now here's the host of this podcast from somewhere in Belize City, Brent Toombs.
Belize is a small society. We have limited talent. And so we have to use what we best have. I mean, and in some instances we can't get the very best, but we put a good team.
Sir, but at the end of the day, you are appointing individuals who are family members and...
Hey, welcome to the podcast for the week of February the 15th. That clip you just heard was the now infamous comment by Prime Minister Johnny Briceno trying to make excuses for why so many relatives of elected PUPs have been appointed to boards and hired as CEOs. The Prime Minister said it's not nepotism. It's a lack of depth in the Belizean talent pool. Well, social media exploded last week as Belizeans took to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok to tell the Prime Minister just how strongly they disagreed with his assessment that Belize has limited talent. Before the week was over, the PM did offer an apology of sorts, saying that his comments were taken out of context and that he was sorry if anyone was offended. Okay, I'm not going to do an autopsy on his apology and spend time talking about how statements of contrition should never contain phrases like, if anyone was offended. Instead, I want to speak to the context of his comment and why what he said did offend so many Belizeans. Prime Minister Briceno was not simply dismissing the majority of us who were not born into politically connected families as lacking in talent. He was attempting to gaslight everyone who bought into the election slogan of everybody for win, only to watch the same small circle of party insiders divvy up the spoils of the election. The outrage came because nobody is buying Prime Minister Briceno's flimsy excuse for nepotism and patronage. Now, of course, this is nothing new for Belize. The previous Prime Minister had numerous relatives providing legal services for government, and his firstborn son was even put in charge of the country's largest cash cow, Belize Telemedia. In fact, you can find glaring examples of nepotism dating all the way back to the earliest days of self-government under then Premier George Price. Just ask all those talented Belizeans who migrated to the United States and elsewhere in the 1970s and 1980s because they got tired of a system that penalized people for supporting the wrong political party and only ever seemed to reward Belizeans who had certain last names. And that's what I think got people pissed off so much last week, and why a comment about limited talent struck so many nerves. This is something that has been simmering since 1964, and maybe Belizeans are finally going to speak out against it, rather than smile politely and hope that a few crumbs get brushed their way. Less than 2 weeks after the PUP won their landslide victory on November 11th, I said on this podcast that the honeymoon would be very short-lived. That's because Prime Minister Briceno was going to have to govern in a post-social media Belize, and that the tolerance for corruption was going to be minuscule because the people did not vote the PUP in. They voted the UDP out. What the PM got last week from all the memes and posts and TikToks and tweets was a taste of what he can expect for the next 5 years. Or at least I hope so. Because the only way we will get better governance is by demanding better governance. There is a saying in politics that perception is reality. But when you look at the various appointments made by the Briceno administration, it's not just perception. The Prime Minister's brother was appointed to the board of directors for Belize Water Services. His sister is now on the investment committee for Belize Social Security. And his cousin is our new Chief Education Officer. The CEO in the Ministry of Education is the cousin of the representative for Fort George, Henry Charles Usher. The son and daughter of the PM CEO, Narda Garcia, have done very well for themselves since the election. Her son is the CEO of the recently reopened Corozal Free Zone, while Garcia's daughter is not only the CEO in the Ministry of Health and Wellness, but is also the president of the National Women's Commission. The wife of the Minister of Tourism and Diaspora Relations was appointed to the board of BTL. Joining her on that board is the son of the Honorable Marconi Leal, who was not only given a board seat at BTL, but is also the CEO in the Ministry of Public Utilities and Logistics. The son of Minister of Public Utilities and Logistics, Rodwell Ferguson Jr., is a member of the board of directors for the Belize Tourism Board. Senator, Foreign Minister, and Minister of Immigration Eamon Courtney has his wife on the board of BTL, while his son serves on the board of the National Institute for Culture and History. And then, of course, there's Dr. Melissa Diaz Musa, the sister-in-law of Minister Karim Musa, who managed to somehow leapfrog 2 deputy directors to take over from Dr. Marvin Manzanero, an actual epidemiologist, and became the acting director of health services during a pandemic. While the good Dr. Manza continues what can only be described as the slowest recovery from COVID-19 in Belize's history. And there have been other examples of appointments since November that smack of nepotism and patronage. I'm not going to list every one, but I think I've listed more than enough to make the case that this is not a good look for the Briceno administration. Certainly not for an electorate that is fed up with politics as usual. Now, if I was to go through and evaluate every single relative or crony that got an appointment from the new government, there actually are several that I would probably have no problem with based on their individual merit. Take Michael Coye, for example, brother of Senator Christopher Coye, who sits on the board of directors of the National Institute for Culture and History. Michael is a brilliant banking and finance man with a passion for the performing arts. I've actually served with Michael on the board of the Belize Audiovisual Industry Association, a completely non-political organization. Now, I don't know Gavin Courtney or Marconi Leal Jr. personally, but they look great on paper, and people I have respect for have good things to say about both gentlemen. So maybe they are exactly the kind of young talent that Belize needs right now. But my issue is that when you can go through the list of nearly every CEO or government-appointed statutory board member and see a direct connection to an elected member of the ruling party, it begins to look a lot like loyalty and lineage are much more important than talent and experience. When you stack a board of directors with people you can count on to do your bidding no matter what, you kneecap any check and balance that board is supposed to provide. We need to be able to trust that the board of directors for BTL or BWS or BTB will make decisions in the best interests of the tax-paying citizens of Belize and not simply do the bidding of their political masters. When you pad a board with people you know will ride or die with you, especially if blood is thicker than water, well, then you get boards who will tolerate ministers writing checks for personal expenses or chairmen who rack up the corporate credit card buying lingerie. Even worse than that, you send a message to every young Belizean struggling to educate themselves in order to contribute to building this nation that their services are not welcome because they don't come from the right family or support the right party. And that leads to brain drain as people exile themselves from Belize because Belize has no use for them. And when that happens, the excuse that the talent pool in Belize is too small becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
We want to hear from you. You can find Brent's 2 Cents on Twitter and Facebook at 2 Cents Belize, or email us at podcast@oshaproductions.com. That's OXA Productions with an S.com.
Your call has been forwarded to an automatic voice message system.
Hi, this is Brent. Thanks for calling the Your 2 Cents hotline. Please leave a message about anything you want to talk about after the beep.
Hey Brent, great podcast, loved it, adored it, was great. So the Gazette thing has been on my mind for a bit, and for someone who considers themselves to be, politically aware, I wouldn't be able to recognize a Gazette if you handed me one. I think having to pay for a Gazette is a slap in the face of good governance, of open democracy, e-governance, of access to information. As far as I'm concerned, Belizean people have been paying that price since time immemorial. These are really the platforms on which the current government administration ran on to convince Belizeans to elect them. And as such, this should be an easy decision and can be done as fast as I could say statutory instrument. I mean, free up the Gazette, man. The more we know, the more power we have. And, if I think about it, maybe that's the problem.
Okay, there is one more bit of news from last week that I want to talk about. On Wednesday of last week, U.S. National Frank Minitello from California arrived at the Philip Goldson International Airport. Now, I don't know if Frank had been following the local news about the proposal to maybe one day legalize marijuana and he got confused, or if he just got high on his own supply and made some terrible decisions about what he needed to bring for his visit to Belize. You know that expression that you don't bring sand to the beach? Well, either Frank was too baked to make a smart decision before traveling international, or maybe he didn't care for the quality of the local product available. But for some reason, old Frank decided to bring his own weed to Belize. Now, Frank is not the first tourist to get busted at the PGIA trying to bring in something that is available on nearly every street corner in this country. But Frank deserves special mention for his effort, or should I say, lack of effort, to hide his attempt at smuggling narcotics. Not only did customs find nearly 1.5 kilograms of marijuana in various forms, including seeds, vacuum packed in transparent food saver bags with the contents of each bag clearly labeled, but Frank walked into customs at the PGIA wearing a sweatshirt with the logo for Fire Genetics, a commercial cannabis company in the San Fernando Valley. The man was literally a walking billboard for weed. And yet he thought he could waltz through customs like Jeff Spicoli showing up late for Mr. Hand's history class, and no one was going to check his bags.
Mr. Spicoli, you're on dangerous ground here. You're causing a major disturbance on my time.
I've been thinking about this, Mr. Hand. If I'm here and you're here, doesn't that make it our time?
Now, in his defense, Frank told the court that he uses marijuana medicinally for pain management. And while I have no problem with either medical or recreational marijuana use, I still can't help but laugh at what a dumbass this guy was to bring so much weed with him while wearing a sweatshirt with the logo for the company that produced what is still a very much illegal product in Belize. Despite objections from the prosecution that Minitello poses a flight risk, he was offered bail in the amount of $6,000, which, at last report, he had been unable to meet. So instead of relaxing with a nice spliff on the beach, Frank is getting an all-inclusive vacation at Her Majesty's Central Prison while on remand. Okay, before I go, I have a couple more things I want to mention. First, if you have not done so already, please make sure you take a listen to Dominique Noralez' latest episode of her podcast, Walasaha. Dom put out a great episode called Gene Pool versus the Talent Pool. And another talented Belizean podcaster, Natasha Stuart, dropped a new episode of her podcast last week about how changing your mindset can change your life. I'll post links to both these podcasts in the description for this episode. Also, Brent's 2 Cents celebrated a remarkable milestone last week by going over 10,000 downloads. Now, I know that may not seem like much compared to what some people get by posting a dance video on TikTok, but in the world of independent podcasting, 10,000 downloads is a very big deal, especially when you do it in only 6 months. So thank you so much to everyone who's been listening to the show, and especially to those of you who have helped grow the audience for this podcast by sharing it with your friends. I also want to thank everyone who's been helping to support Brent's 2 Cents financially, including Dominique in Barbados and Erica in the Netherlands, who each bought me some coffees last week. If you want to pitch in to help cover the costs of hosting and marketing this podcast, you'll find a link for Buy Me a Coffee in the description for this show. Remember, you can be part of the podcast movement in Belize by sharing Brent's 2 Cents with at least one person who otherwise may not know about it. And don't forget to subscribe to all the great Belizean podcasts on your favorite app so you never miss an episode from any of us. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at 2 Cents Belize. And don't forget that you can always leave a voice message for the podcast about anything you want to talk about. You'll find that link in the description for this episode. And that's going to do it for episode 25 of Brent's 2 Cents. I'll be back next week with a brand new episode. But until then, please continue to wear your masks, wash your hands, stay home as much as possible, and most importantly, be nice to each other.
Brent's 2 Cents is a presentation of OSHA Productions, Belize's affordable professional video production company.
All I need are some tasty waves, cool buzz, and I'm fine.